Hello, welcome, welcome, welcome. For those of you that are joining us live and those that will listen to us later, this is Tea with Miss G. And this evening, we're going to have a very courageous and difficult dialogue about mental health. And gathered in this sacred and very safe space are members of our family talking about mental health. So I want to start with the OG of OGs, Mauricio, Tony Becerra, an OG freedom rider. Hi, Tony.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you for joining us.
So excited.
We have two exquisite educators, and you guys have taught all the levels. Currently, we have Meghan Abruzzo, who was working with high school students in Long Island, New York, a freedom writer, teacher extraordinaire. And I want to do a special shout out to not only your family, but also your students in the BOCES program. Hi, Meghan.
Hi, everyone. Good evening.
I know that some of your students might be joining us live, and hopefully, when you watch this as a class tomorrow, they will be so proud of their teacher.
Hope so.
I hope so too. On your screen, you see the name Tompock, which we lovingly have bestowed on Professor Dr. Thomas Reifer, but we love to call him Tompock because he can quote and will do so every Tupac song in that lexicon. So, Dr. Reifer, to your students at the University of San Diego, Tompock to your Freedom Rider family, thank you for joining us from the University of San Diego this evening.
To be here with you.
We're so proud. We're gathered to have a conversation about mental health. And I have to be honest, when I was going to college, it wasn't in my textbooks. When I was learning to be a teacher, it wasn't part of my preparation. And I want to ask the same of you, Meghan and Dr. Reifer, when you were preparing to be educators and esteemed professors, in those early years of our profession, were either of you part of the profession that got sat down by our powers that be to explain mental health and how we should deal with it in our classrooms? I'll start with you, Meghan. I know that you came to this profession a little bit later, but did you have anybody in the credentialing or teacher preparation sit down with you and say, this is going to be something that's going to be something you deal with on a daily basis?
No, not at all. Initially I had done my bachelor and grad work in early childhood education. And the most closely related class I took was any of my psych classes. There was one that's called abnormal psych, and that's where it kind of dipped in to some of the the mental health issues, but nothing to the degree I would honestly say that 99% of the things that I have learned have been kind of on the job training, in subsequent classes that I've taken to kind of further my knowledge. But no, never in grad and undergrad, never anything that would have prepared me for what I do on a daily basis.
Dr. Reifer, you love to share that you had three degrees and never had that high school graduation. So when you were in high school, you were in pure survival mode. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy, you were literally in survival mode. So I'm sure when you were learning the academics of being a professor, you weren't simultaneously learning how to deal with mental health with your students. Is that a safe assumption?
Safe assumption. And in fact, I was studying psychology. I mostly didn't go to high school. For 1 year, I was studying psychology, and I stopped studying psychology because it was too close. I couldn't handle it. I remember reading Vivian, The Life and Suicide of an Adolescent Girl, and I was like, oh no, I can't. It's too much for me. I can deal with numbers of people, but one person in pain. So I had to do self-regulation then, and nobody really talks about it.
I love it. And we're going to dive a little deeper into those survival years for you then and how you take care of yourself now. Tony, what I have loved is the student who didn't like school in middle school now spends almost 3 out of 4 days a week in middle schools. But when you were in middle school, you had no idea how to talk about mental health or depression.
Mhm.
So tell the audience why it's so important for you now, when you are in those middle schools and those high schools, to talk about depression and mental health.
I feel like growing up, I didn't know what this thing was. And I knew that not everybody had it, because I would see like, my brother and my cousins and stuff, and I would see how they would just kind of jump out of bed and they would have a smile on their face and they'd be fine, and they would get sad, but then they'd get happy again. And I was always sad, and I always kind of felt like in pain in the morning. I didn't want to get out of bed, like things hurt, like I wasn't really sure what this thing was. I felt like I was sick without the symptoms. And I felt like later on, once I realized what it was, and when you made me talk to a therapist and get diagnosed and everything, I remember thinking, damn, if only I had somebody to tell me what this was when I was, 14, 15, 16, it would have been so much easier. Just had I just understood what it was and how to deal with it, I felt like life would have been 10 times easier. So now I will talk about it and I will mention it every single time I speak to kids, because you never know who's that one kid that needs to hear that and needs to see an adult that's dealing with it and is okay.
Tony, I love when you talk about when you were sick and how your mom, even to this day, would make the special soup and love on her beautiful boy. So when you have that cough or that sneeze or that sore throat, it was really symbolic of, I need to be nurtured, I need to be taken care of. But your depression wasn't as evident as the sniffle or the runny nose. Can you talk about that? How you didn't get that same sympathy from your family because they also didn't know that you were dealing with depression.
Yeah, it was easier being sick. I was happier being sick. When you're sick, you can feel it, you can see it, it's visible, it's obvious. And when you're sick, it's like, okay, stay home, stay in bed. Here's some soup. I'm gonna make you some tea. I'm gonna like bring you some medicine. I'm gonna take care of you. And that's exactly what you need on those really, really bad mental health days. But on those mental health days, there's nothing to see. So you're being lazy, like why don't you just get up? Bootstraps, man, be tough, like power through it, come on, like los hombres no lloran, like men don't cry, right? Get up and face it, and when you don't have that option of staying in bed and taking care of yourself, and luckily, when we become adults, we get to a place where we have a great boss and we work for a great company. We can take mental health days off and stuff like that. But the younger kids who are working crappy jobs, they don't have that. They have to go to work. They have to do it. And like, then you just feel worse after that. And then you just go into this like deeper and deeper hole, and people can't see it, so they don't treat you accordingly.
And when you're a kid, your job is school, and that is, I love watching our empaths in action, because as you're talking, Tony, both Tom Pock and Meghan are nodding. So I want to ask you, Meghan, you had postpartum depression.
Mm-hmm.
And for those that don't know the symptoms, you have these beautiful boys. I am obsessed with your sons, as you know. But what is it like when you have all this anticipation of bringing life into this world? You have these beautiful babies and you don't bounce back. You don't feel that joy. Can you explain that to the audience, what it was like for you suddenly to have postpartum depression?
It was really, really hard. And I, self-diagnosed, I'm a perfectionist. So I wanted to do everything right. I read every parenting book I could find. Like I said earlier, my training was in early childhood education. So this is my area of expertise. I should know exactly how to do this and be able to handle it and be superwoman. And it was really scary because some of the thoughts, they get pretty dark. And I didn't want to reach out for help. I was really, really stubborn about it, probably to a fault, where I knew with my first son something wasn't right, and I didn't say anything. And it wasn't until my second son, and I can remember a few months in, a doctor, I had gone for my physical, and the question that made me just bawl was, do the things you love no longer bring you joy? And it was like it finally unleashed. But I felt like a failure. Here it is. I've trained for this my entire life. I've wanted this my entire life. This is everything I've ever dreamed of. And here it is where like I don't feel like I want to do this, or I'm scared to do this, or like I said, those invasive thoughts, they get really scary. So it's really hard, and it took, like I said, it took a good solid 3 years of me, kind of steadfast, even my husband, I'm sure he knew that things were going on, but I don't think he realized to the extent of it. And it was a learning process for myself, and that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay. Because you need a little extra, either therapy or medication or just time to, to focus on myself. That's okay. That's actually making me be a better mom than if I just keep this all in, and it was a journey. And like I said, it definitely was, it was hard. It was very, very hard.
And I appreciate your candor. Tom Puck, I know for you that the hardest times for you, ironically, are holidays, are school breaks. I've been blessed to spend holidays with you when you've joined us at a juvenile hall on Christmas Eve or Christmas. But I always know I need to check in on you when there's a spring break, when there's a winter break, when your class does not runneth over, because you have shared with me that you suffer from complex PTSD. So can you share the difference for those that aren't familiar with just PTSD and complex PTSD?
Sure. So complex PTSD comes from basically growing up where you have constant danger and violence. In fact, I was thinking when Tony was talking about being sick, because I always used to say, if I had the bubonic plague, I would not go to school. And in fact, I remember this one time I was in grade school and I was sicker than a dog and I didn't say a word because I did not want to go home. That was a total nightmare for me. So school was the one safe place for me. So it turns out that complex post-traumatic stress disorder in your 30s and 40s gets more complicated. You kind of have to deal with it. And one of the things I found is that when I am out of school, my brain, thinks that it's not as safe. So I associate safety with the classroom. In fact, there's this line in Blue Chips where the guy's a basketball coach and he says, I don't understand the world except on a basketball court. Well, it's kind of like that for me in the classroom. And I always say, I didn't graduate from high school because I didn't have a Miss G. And you said, well, you have one now. So, it's that place where, like in the Freedom Riders, where you're recognized and you're safe and people understand you. And when I lost that, when I went to junior high school, then everything fell apart for me. And luckily, I've had a chance to be the educator, but I could really relate to what Tony says about being, just the thoughts coming back about being sick.
All three of you have I'm always going to fixate on words. And all three of you talked about words like invasive thoughts, things that were dark, things that are complex. So all three of you at some point have understood suicide ideation. For you, Tony, did you understand what that term meant when you were younger, when you did not want to get out of bed, and sometimes when you did not want to be here? Were you familiar of what that was and why you were experiencing that?
Originally, no. Later on, as I got a little older, it's funny because I got on medication, and what the medication did was it made me feel nothing. I wasn't feeling sad anymore, but I also wasn't feeling happy or joy or any kind of emotion. And I feel like in certain cases the cure is worse than the disease. And I understood instantly, like, oh, this is why people go. This is why people leave, because there's nothing. Nothingness is worse than pain. Like, I know what pain is. Like, I know what depression is. but that nothingness, that emptiness, I didn't know what that was. And I could see how somebody could very easily, go down the wrong path with that. So I stopped taking it, and I actually haven't been on anything since. And friends have told me like, well, yeah, that was a long time ago. It's come a long way, but I feel like I got a good handle on it now, that I'd rather just not mess with it. Because even though if I have 9 bad days in a row, but I have that 10th good day, that one day makes it all worthwhile.
Wow. I want to share something with our audience that we often share when we're at schools. And on the other side of this, I want to ask both Tom Pock and Meghan about Tony's candor and transparency with the subject. And it's a way that he learned to deal with his depression. This comes from an interview I did with Tony that we turned into a podcast. And it was talking about how he personally copes with his depression. So I want to show you this beautiful interview. And on the other side of this, I want to ask both Tom Puck and Meghan how it affects you, or how you could see this description from Tony being useful to your students, whether they are in the high school program with Meghan or collegiate with Tom. So let's check out Tony talking about his coping skills with mental health. Tell the audience about your calendar, which I love, and it also makes me sad.
Yeah, one of the things I started doing when I first started working with a therapist, she told me, because she herself actually had depression, so she told me, when we look back on our weeks or our months or our years, all we remember is like the bad days, and so we think that like we had depression every day, and it hurts every day, and it's horrible. She goes, so next time you have a good day, at the end of the day, tell yourself, today was a good day. And I thought, okay, well, whatever. And then a couple of weeks after, I remember it was like my cousin's birthday. Everything was good, and I was home and I was getting ready to go to bed. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror, and it wasn't there, right? Like the little thing wasn't there. And I looked in the mirror and I told myself, today is May 7th. Today was a good day. And I put a little circle on the calendar, right? And then I woke up the next day and it was back. So the thing was there. It was hard to get up and everything. So then at the end of the day, I had to admit to myself, okay, today was not a good day. I'm going to put an X there. But when I put in the X there, I saw the circle and I thought like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to try to get a circle. If I don't get it, it's okay. Because the next day, I'm going to shoot for that circle again. And the rest of the month were all X's. But I can remember that one circle, that one day, that just kept me going. And that was the prize. So I kept doing it. And every now and then I would hit a circle. I'd hit the little gold coin. And as the year went on, there was more circles and less X's because I was doing the work. And earlier this year, I had my first full month of nothing but circles. And now, when I have an X, it's not so hard. I had an X a couple of weeks ago, and it was a really bad day, and I put it down, and it didn't feel that bad because the X was surrounded by circles.
Tony, I hope on the screen that Dr. Reifer and Meghan and myself are the X's and the circles that are making you not feel so alone. I thank you for being so candid. I thank you for for speaking it into existence. And Tom Buck, I'm looking at your face and I just want to reach through the screen, give you a squeeze. I'm so happy I'm going to be in San Diego tomorrow night to do that in person. But I know that you've had some of those moments as well where you have that bad day. And so with your candor and your beautiful spirit, can you look at our boy Tony and talk about how his description of marking his calendar affects you and has you feeling some of those same feelings?
Well, first of all, I just got to say how much I love Tony. Tony's like my brother. And one of the reasons I love Tony so much is not because, when I met Maria, she told me that, Erin just walked in every day and said, she thought we were the smartest kids in the world. And when I met you, I thought, well, they are the smartest kids in the world, except, of course, all my students too. Because Tony doesn't bullshit. He's just real with you. And he talks about connecting to kids because he doesn't bullshit with them. Because that's what kids hate most of all. Yeah. Just be honest with me, So I've had times when my PTSD got worse, when every minute was painful. And I grew up, I trained myself how to not be suicidal. And then one of my younger brothers slit his throat. And then later he committed suicide. And you can't really stop thinking about suicide if your brother commits suicide. So Tony's just real, the struggle is real. And the ability to be honest about it and just normalize it, like, hey, this is real. People struggle with this and it's not their fault. And especially, whether it's biochemical or normal or from abuse or whatever it is, it's part of the struggles in our world. And we can at least be honest about it. And Tony could call me up and say, Tom, I need you to be on the street corner tomorrow, and I can't tell you why, and I would be there. And that's how much I love Tony, and I admire him.
I love seeing some of the comments that are coming in real time, Tony, how our beautiful Freedom Rider teacher, Emily Bollinger, was not anticipating crying this early and just wanted to give you kudos for your vulnerability. Meghan, you serve high school students who put up a wall and put up their dukes. And would Tony's words penetrate that wall? Would Tony's words really speak specifically to the young men that you serve? I know I don't want to be gender stereotypical, but sometimes young men specifically aren't used to expressing themselves in a room full of students. So what are your thoughts on what Tony just shared?
Well, again, Tony, thank you for always being so vulnerable. And I just shared with Tony while we were kind of warming up for this that I spent a lot of time on Tony's story last week in class, and we watched a lot of his videos, including the Alive at Midnight video. And that one, no matter how many times I watch it, it always just gets me right in the back of the throat. That idea of that little glimmer of hope, whether it's the clock hitting midnight or that circle instead of that X, like Tom said, you don't bullshit it. You call it what it is. This is me. This is how I manage it. And I find, and every time we spend this, these few days on Tony, you can see that spark in a kid that like, oh, that makes sense. Or, oh, that sounds like my story. I've seen Tony do it with crowds too, where, you get the kid in the back of the room that's going to wait until the very last minute to come up and ask that question, because you're so approachable. You're not putting up any walls. You're not, blowing smoke. You're completely real. And I think it's important for the kids to see that because like Tom said, they can see right through it. They know when you're putting on any false fronts. They know when you're, making something up on the fly. You have to be genuine. So I think to show that vulnerability and that genuineness, I think it definitely, I've seen it help in my room, in, presentations with you. It's so needed because there's so many, especially again, not to with the gender stereotyping, there's still that tough guy aspect, and I think that being in touch with who you are and what you need to better yourself or get through it. I think that's like a definition of tough, right? It's great that you're that self-aware and you're not hiding behind it. You're not letting it define you. but you're working through it. And I think kids need to see that, you know.
Tony, I have a question for you from the audience, and I want to follow up that question with a question about the Alive at Midnight. But the question from the audience was, do certain cultural or societal norms affect whether a guy, a male, will ask for help? And I want you to address that, the cultural side, the societal side, the gender side. Do you find that it's a little bit more difficult for young men of color specifically to go to that sensitive place?
100%, absolutely. I would have never like looked into it or asked for help or anything if you hadn't made me. And I don't say like you asked me to go. No, you made me go, right? Because you knew that I needed it and you knew that, you know, I had to do it. And it wasn't until about 10 years later that I finally like sat down and had a conversation with my parents about it. And of course they blamed themselves, you know. And I'm like, no, it has nothing to do with you. Like, you guys are great. It's just, you know, it's just the wiring, you know. That's how I explained it to my dad. I'm like, I got faulty wiring, pops. Like, you're a mechanic, you know what I mean? Sometimes it works right, sometimes it doesn't, you know. And absolutely, like, instead of them being like nurturing towards me, I had to be nurturing towards them. You know, I had to hug it out with them and be like, it's okay, guys, it's not your fault. I'm still your boy. It's still me. I'm the same person I always was. You know, it's just, I just have to treat the world a little different. That's all. You know, I just need to acknowledge what I have. And, you know, we all got dealt different cards, you know, and these are the cards I got dealt. And now that I know how to, now I know how to handle it a little bit better, then it's okay. You know?
Tony, before we move on, I want you to talk about your philosophy of Alive at Midnight. You've shared that since the pandemic, when things were really hard for you. You did not like being on Zoom. You went missing, and I had to go searching. And you came up with this quote for young people who are also in a dark place. And can you describe what Alive at Midnight means to you?
Yeah. So I have batteries, right? I have an energy bar, like in a video game. And whenever I do things around people or I have to be outside or I have to do anything, my life meter gets drained. The way I replenish it is by being by myself and fixing it, or being around people that understand what I'm going through. The reason why Tompak is my brother and Meghan is my sister is because I don't want to sit there and talk about it. It sucks, right? I just want to be around people who understand what it is and what I'm going through, and then we give each other energy. When I didn't have that during the pandemic, when I couldn't see people, when I couldn't be around people, I just got to a point where I was completely drained. And one thing I've always kind of like thought to myself is, um like, the day, right? Like, I can't think about next week, next month, next year. I can only think about the day, like survival mode, like Tom said, right? Survival mode. Just, and today ends at 12:59. At midnight, it's tomorrow. All we got to do is stay alive until 12 o'clock. And then at 12 o'clock, it's tomorrow. And tomorrow has the promise to bring something better. Alive at midnight. Let's just stay alive. Let's go to sleep, and let's pray for a better tomorrow. Because whenever I go to sleep, it resets, right? Sometime, most of the time, it's still there. Most of the time, that little thing, it's always there. It's always nagging. It's always destroying me a little bit at a time. But every now and then, it's either really, really light or it's completely gone. And those are the days, man. Sometimes I wake up and that thing is gone. Like, I get a day of glory without that thing there, and I can change the world. It boggles my mind how normal people don't go around changing the world all the time. I'm like, you guys should be getting more stuff accomplished. Like, if you guys don't have depression, like, there's no reason to be sad, you know? And then I get a great day. And then the next day I wake up and it's back, right? But at least at midnight, it's tomorrow, and we might get a better day tomorrow. So.
Tom Pock, I love getting texts from you at like 3:55 in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. So whatever time your clock resets, I saw you nodding. I know that you have sadly sometimes gone down a very dark tunnel. And in Dear Freedom Writer, you poetically wrote about the lighthouse. You were all about the light. So can you talk about, for you, what does it mean to be in darkness one day, and then the very next day to be the lighthouse and the light for someone else?
Well, it's very complex, because one of the things that Tony talked about that really struck me is that you were talking about hope, like in Shawshank, and you were talking about being uncomfortably numb with the pills. And I don't think people can live without hope. So recently, I had a therapist ask me, what was it like not getting the love and stuff like that? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I spent my childhood waiting to be attacked, like being loved, being cared, being like, it's like that's just out of my mind. I'm trying to figure out, how do I survive today? And that was one of the things that really struck me about the Freedom Riders is, if you're trying to survive today, you can't really think about schoolwork, as Tony said in the documentary, like, some things are more important, So the hard part about that for the mental health is that if you spend your life trying to survive, you're not really spending your life trying to thrive. And once you're out of that situation, recognizing that you're out of that situation and trying to love yourself and overcome the feeling that it was all your fault, which people feel because it gives them a feeling of control. Like, if it wasn't your fault, then that means you weren't in control. And that really sucks. That's really a hard thing to bear. But then, like Tony says, and Meghan says, you find other people. And when we lost our friend Lexi, I knew it was going to happen with Meghan, that she was going to, people think it's their fault. And it's partly related to feeling like they want to be in control. But Meghan was amazing and is amazing. And that's probably why Lexi stayed alive as long as she did.
Tom Buck, I want to thank you for calling a light on someone we love dearly. I know that Nancy Rodriguez is in the chat room right now. And because of you, Meghan, we had somebody beautiful and bold come into our lives. I'm going to use present tense because we all still feel Lexi. But you not only brought Lexi into our lives, you also brought this incredible Rodriguez family. So you were the educator who had Lexi, and she wrote in Dear Freedom Writer her mental health journey. And I want to read to you a question that Nancy just submitted in honor of her daughter. She said, how do you maintain boundaries when your work feels so personal? Lexi was like a daughter for you, a big sister to your sons. And what warning signs tell you it's time to step back and possibly recharge? So that was a question submitted by Nancy, unbeknownst to her, that we would be evoking her beautiful daughter's name. So Meghan, out of deep love of the Rodriguez family and Lexi, who is very much still with us in spirit, how do you answer Nancy's question with dignity?
Yeah, I think it's probably the greatest challenge that I've personally had working where I work. We have classes that switch every 38 minutes, but it's at most 6 kids a class. And a lot of days it's not even the full 6. So you really, really get to know these kids. And, they get to know you in turn too, and I try to humanize myself. And I push really hard in the beginning of the year to do like what you did, Misty, with developing relationships and finding out what they like, what makes them tick, what things are they doing after school and things like that. And, some of these kids will come out right away and share all this stuff. And, if they don't share their history, I'm going to learn their history from their therapist. And it's really hard. I take a lot of kids home with me, metaphorically. I've gotten better at it. I've been in this school for just about 13 years now. But I can't say there's one clear, I don't, it's hard to answer that second part about how do you know when to pull back, I think as a parent, I've been able to kind of draw my boundary at is what I'm metaphorically taking home, that baggage I'm taking home, is that affecting my boys somehow? Is it, if that makes sense? I think if I were to determine a boundary, that might be what it is, but it's impossible. I mean, I go home and worry about my kids all the time. I can't let it stop me from doing what I'm doing. And I have to know that when I lay my head down on the pillow at the end of the night, that I took all the steps necessary to ensure that that kid is safe, and that I gave that kid, hopefully, even if for 38 minutes, a brighter part of their day. So that's kind of how I manage. But ask any teacher in my building; everybody struggles with that, taking the kids home with you, and how do you maintain that?
I love that we've got some questions that were submitted, both one for you, Dr. Reifer, and one for you, Meghan. So I want to start with an audio question that was submitted to us, Dr. Reifer, from your student, Jane. You are not only a professor, but you're also the Dean of Social Studies at University of San Diego. I love that's your office and all of those books. Yes, he has read all of them. Not only has he read them, he's also authored many of them. But I love that one of your students this semester submitted a question. So let's listen to Jane's question for you as her favorite professor at the University of San Diego. And I would love for you to answer her question for all of us.
Hi there, my name is Jane Scroggs. I am a senior at the University of San Diego and a student and good friend of Dr. Reifer's. My question for you all today is, how do you as educators, especially those whose field of study examines distressing elements of our world and topics that can be difficult to talk about, protect your own mental health while simultaneously avoiding ignorance or inaction?
Well, it's a wonderful question, and it relates a little bit to what Meghan was talking about, because, when you get on the airplane, it says that you put on the oxygen mask first, because if you're not okay, you can't help anybody else. So for a while, I would tell students, don't think I'm teaching you about what I think is the most important, because some things I don't teach about. If I can't handle teaching about a certain thing because it's too close, I'm the captain of the ship. If the captain's not doing okay, then so you have to be aware of your boundaries, and also, it's really critically, and we talked about this during the pandemic, the sense of purpose. We have a purpose to make the world better because we're being honest and we're not lying, and we're trying to make the world better, and we're doing our best. And that sense of purpose is critical to facing what's going on in the world. You got to project a sense of hope. My sense of hope comes from the fact that I really didn't think I was going to survive, but somehow I did. And it wasn't the teachers. They didn't change my life situation or something like that. They just cared about me. And in my world, that was like, wow, somebody actually cares about me. They really care about what happens to me. And that's like oxygen. If I wouldn't have had that, I wouldn't be alive. So the thing is that you don't know the effect that you're having on a student. You can't save them, right? You can model for them a better way to live and be a person who cares about them. And of course, the boundaries are complex, but what I realized, and also for my little brothers and sisters too, sometimes the most important thing you can do is just be that light in their world, telling them that they're loved and they're cared about and they have infinite potential because you really believe it. Now, it's up to them to get the help to act on that potential, but we all believe in it. We all believe in our students. And sometimes they don't believe in themselves, and we believe that we believe in them, but we just keep believing. The lighthouse is just there, as the author says. It doesn't go looking for people to rescue. It just stands there shining. And
That's beautiful.
People did that for us, and we're paying it forward to other people.
Meghan, I feel very voyeuristic because I am on a thread with your sisters, not your biological sisters, but your Freedom Writer sisters. You Nancy Rodriguez and Tammy Purrington, the beloved Mrs. P. And I love that Tammy, who so fiercely loves on her babies, tries to be that lighthouse in Sequoia, New York, submitted a question specifically for you. Knowing that you work with high school students and she works with middle school, specifically sixth grade, I'd love for you to respond to the beautiful question that she has for you, but she sent us a video asking this question. So let's look at Mrs. P's incredible question for you. And on the other side of this video, I would love for you to give your sister an incredible answer.
Hi, everyone. I have a question for Meg. And since COVID, I've noticed a lot more mental health issues with my younger students, my sixth graders. And I'm always so afraid that I'm going to miss something, that's so blaring in my face, and I'm not going to recognize it as a signal that they're asking for help. So I'm looking for any advice that you can give me, any signs that really stand out to you as they are definite cries for help. I don't want to miss one of those. Second, what do you do? What is your line of defense? How do you first go ahead trying to help them so that they get the help that they need as quickly as possible?
Two difficult questions, but I think questions that all teachers care about. So would you mind answering Mrs. P's question, Meghan?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, there's a lot of different signs, and each kid is going to have kind of their own code to crack, so to speak. Some kids you'll notice things like their head is down more, or they're less engaged, or they're eating less, or they're eating more. Their mood, they tend to be a little more irritable, but you can also get the kid who, has kind of made peace with their decision and they're elevated, they're brighter. It's like the weight of the world is lifted off their shoulders. So there's a lot of signs to look for. And some of them can be really, really subtle. Sometimes I worry about the kid that comes in, dressed in full makeup and new clothes, just as much as I do the kid that shows up and puts their head down, because something is different, something in their, emotion and their regulation is different. And I always err on the side of caution. Fortunately, in the program that I work in, we have 2 psychiatric units in my building. So every student has a therapist and, or for some kids, a nurse practitioner for medication management. So it's kind of a unicorn of a program in that sense, but I pick up the phone immediately. And if I'm really worried about a kid, I don't let them leave my room, and I will make sure that a therapist gets to them. And, I can, even if it seems like nothing, they will take the kid, they will do an assessment right there, and we have, fortunately, unfortunately, we have the ability to call the ambulance and send the kid off to, to get hopefully the help that they need. But yeah, I don't any change in behavior really. Like I said, the eating, the focus, the head down, or like I said, the elation on the other end of it, just anything, there are days where I go home just so kind of drained, because you're like a detective with some of these kids, and you really have to pick out and choose, and you have to know your kids, that's, like I said, really September is purely spent on getting to know everything I can about these kids, knowing their backgrounds, knowing, what makes them tick, so that you're better at those detective skills, trying to find, what's going on, even if it's not as serious as suicide ideation. Is it something else that's going on, that can then, kind of domino effect to that. So there's a ton of signs. I know that's not the easiest answer to that question, Tammy, and I'm sorry. But it's just what I found, those things that seem to be different, or, even, like the blatant things, the kids got their sleeves rolled up and, you can see the cuts, that's a little more, I'm just thinking as I'm going in, the more blatant things, I tend to look more for the more subtle changes in behavior than the more obvious, but they keep me on my toes. There's countless signs.
Dr. Reifer, we have a question from you from the audience, and they wanted to know if you would say that the awareness of mental health has evolved over the years, and what are some of the major differences um, during your decade and today? And I don't know what that decade is. We're not going to talk about. You were my brother, and I'm going to say that you were sweet 16 and never been kissed. But have you noticed as we have evolved as educators that
Oh, absolutely.
maybe the awareness has evolved? And can you give us some examples?
So one, I mean, there's just a lot more information out there. And I've read a lot of this stuff and I know a lot of the people who've written it, but that was for survival purposes. Because like Tony said, I need to know what's going on, right? And once you give me tools to know what's going on, that's why I love knowledge so much. I can work with that. So there's much greater awareness, including about trauma and abuse, which is why I try to be open about it because the society doesn't help us by not being honest about it. Um, and also where we have a whole mental health program here at the University of San Diego because many years ago we lost people and people really recognize that we have to do a better job, and we love our students and we care about our students, and we're trying to bring all these things. It's one of the reasons why we have the Freedom Riders come. So the awareness about it has really changed. And that means that we can talk to our students. And I've had students who come in and they say, well, I'm doing okay, Dr. Reifer. And I use this line from Spy Game. I say, when did Noah build the ark? And they're like, huh? I was like, before the rain, before the rain. There's the counseling center right there.
Mhm.
The time to make a plan is not when you're in an emergency. That's when it's the hardest time to make a plan. And we also know this from personal experience, right? When you're having a hard time, that's the hardest time to reach out. So the thing is that there's lots of things, and the Freedom Riders does it too in your work, integrating that. That's one of the reasons why during the pandemic we said, geez, we got to get together because we're going to have all these kids at risk. And we've got to have a way to reach to them in this difficult time to build that resilience and build that sense of purpose and let
Mm.
them know that we care about them.
I would consider all three of you wounded healers in your own mental health journey. You have all chosen professions where you heal others. And what you said, Tom Puck, that is so profound is that personal experience. So I'm going to ask you all some personal questions. Before the rain, because I have seen you before the rain, and I've also seen you during the tsunami.
The downpour.
And I want to start with you, Tony. When you have gone missing, and I become frantic. I think you gave me the name of Jason from Friday the 13th, that I am like a stalker. I want you to talk about when you go missing, because that has happened in our Freedom Rider history. What could friends and caretakers and family members do when someone they love does go missing, doesn't answer a phone, doesn't respond by text, doesn't show up at an event? What can we do to lovingly be there and show empathy and support?
Um, exactly what you do. You start with text, and if the texts don't get answers, they turn into a phone call. And if the phone calls don't get answered, they turn into a visit. Um, like when you're in that bad place, you're not like if you don't answer a loved one's phone call, it's not because you don't love them or because you don't need them. You want them. You just don't have the strength to pick up the call or to text or to call back. And I know that seems ridiculous. I know. I
Mm,
to people like to people who don't understand. It's like it's just pick it up, man. Just text back. What's the problem? Just 2 minutes. Um, I'm telling you, if I knew, you know what I mean. I'd be cured. It's just one of those things, and I think one of the things that I've learned to do in the last few years is I've learned to be honest with people, especially my friends, and
mm,
I've learned to surround myself since I don't like talking about it. It's funny because I talk about it all the time, right? I talk about it all the time with kids, like almost every day, and then the kids are like, "Man, doesn't it suck talking about it? Don't you hate going back there?" Yes, absolutely. I hate it. And it drains me and it makes me empty and it hurts and it's painful, but it's necessary. you know? And so what I do is I surround myself with people that I don't have to like say all this stuff. I can just give them a call and we can talk about other silly, stupid things. And then at the end of that conversation, I feel better because I know that they understand me. Tom, how many times have we had just silly, dumb conversations
Oh
or
yeah.
text back and forth, right? About nothing, about stupid things, you know? And at the beginning of that conversation, I felt like crap. And at the end of the conversation, I felt a lot better because I know that I have somebody on the other end that understands like what I'm going through. And I don't need to dwell it back up. I just know that they're there for me.
Mm. You know, Tom Puck, I'm going to call you out. I have noticed a pattern with you. I get maybe 3 to 7 texts a week from you, and I love it. Sometimes it is a unicorn. Sometimes it is a news story. And sometimes it's a declaration of how much you love me to the moon, to infinity, to another galaxy. When you are hurting the most, you are a self-saboteur and you say you don't have to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I want to respond the most, when I can tell that you desperately want the response, but you sabotage and say, I don't need it. You don't have to respond. I don't know if you're aware of that pattern. And I'm glad that I'm the recipient because I always want to respond, but talk about that for other people that may be self-saboteurs.
Well, I
That
won't even admit to it entirely. But no, but you have to understand that if you spend the first part of your life people attacking you, rejection is a pretty intense thing, And so one of the ways I deal with that, and it's not about the other person, but and I know it is kind of weird, but I just, people are busy and people have other things, and I want them to know that like it's important for me to be able to do that and to reach out. And I do that with other, scholars too that I'm reaching out to because I'm trying to get information or whatever. And part of the thing is it's just self-protection, right? Because if I say that and they don't respond, then I don't feel bad about it, right? And I don't want to put a thing on them, but there is a thing that relates to a deeper thing, which has to do that it took me a long time.
we love you, Tom Pock. Take your time. We love you. This is a safe space.
When your parents leave you when you're a kid, that's your experience. People go away. They don't come back. So you figure out a way to deal with that. Because when you're a kid, you think it's because there's something about you. So, in some of the therapies, they talk about opposite action. So if you feel depressed, you go out and stuff like that. My whole life is opposite action, right? Interacting with people, trusting people. What is the reason I have to do that? Well, actually, teachers who cared about me, my friends who cared about me. But from the adult world, I always had this fear that there's going to be some reason somebody's going to come up with something. And so it took me a long time to put out of my mind that for any given reason, anybody I was close with, tomorrow might not ever see them again, might not be their friend. And I'm still working on it. It's gotten better, like with you. But like what Tony said, like when I'm having the hardest time, that's when I can't answer the phone because if I answer the phone, I'm going to burst into tears, and I don't want to do that. So the times when I most need to be around people are the time it's hardest to be. And so I just go away first because it's a lot easier than if you're afraid somebody's going to go away from you. And, I was a runaway. So that's a big part of my identity. I ran. That's why I'm alive. So it's a kind of thing. I've gotten better on it, and my friends used to tell me, they'd say, well, he's doing a Tom Reifer. What do you mean? Well, I wouldn't say goodbye. I just leave. And I recognize it's because for me to even say, like, I'll see you later, something like that, I have to think about it. It kind of makes me uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So I just go away.
Meghan, as the teacher that is tasked with loving kids back to life. You have probably seen similar traits with Tom Pock and Tony in those that you serve now, and sadly with students you might have lost, like Lexi. So when you're listening to them about not wanting to pick up the phone, wanting to run, not wanting to trust, to push away and push down, what does that teacher inside of you want to say or do to reassure both Tom Pock and Tony, but those that you're currently humbly serving, that you're not going anywhere?
Yeah, I think giving that reassurance, and Tom and I text frequently throughout the week, and you're safe, and I'm here, and I'm and it's a two-way conversation there, but just giving that reassurance that I'm not going anywhere. You can disappear, you can ghost me, you can be mad, you can scream, yell, whatever. I really try to make it that I am not leaving. You're going to have to push me out, but I'm coming right back. I'm not going anywhere. I think that stability, be it with Tom when he's feeling a little shaky, or when it's with my students, that stability, that consistency, and that genuine love. When Tom and I text and we say, I love you all the way, or I love you to the moon and back, or the little pictures we'll send back and forth. I mean that. I don't send that lightheartedly. In our Sunday texts with my sisters, when I love and miss you all so much. That's genuine. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. And I'm with my students too. Obviously I can't sit there and say I love every one of them. That's inappropriate. But I can make it so that I can empathize with them. I hear them out. I have a student who, she doesn't come in very often, but she has a really, really tough home life. And when she does come in, she will bypass homeroom. She comes right to my room. And it's always the conversation of, are you okay? Are you safe? Okay. Do you want to vent? Do you want help? What do you want from me today? What do you need me to be for you today? And I try to do that with all my kids, if they're struggling, and there's some kids, at this point in the year, I've gotten to know, like, if I go up and continue to ask them what they need, that's not good, or I'll slip a kid a note like, hey, I know you need a minute. Like, let me know what I can do. I'm not going to proceed until you direct me there, listening to what they need. But I think ultimately that stability and that consistency and that showing up, it's how I approach it anyway. Is it right, wrong, and different? I don't know, but that's how I kind of navigate things like that.
I'm going to ask you, as our guest and our audience that have joined us live, to stick around for a few more minutes, because I have some really poignant questions that we've received from the audience, and I want to try to get through a few of them. This one is for you, Tony. How different is depression in your adulthood compared to adolescence? And is one easier to manage than the other?
Yeah, I tell the kids sometimes, when the kids that are in high school or like middle school, I tell them I promise you, this will be the worst time of your life. Right? I know that sounds bad, but it's actually, like, to regular people, it sounds bad, but to those of us who went through depression in middle school and high school and all that, it's very comforting and reassuring, because we know that things are just going to continue to get slightly better, slightly better, slightly better. Like Tom said, he was a runaway and things got better, right? Because you left to survive. We grow up to survive. Once we're in charge of our own life, then it becomes better, because even when things are bad, it's on us. It's not on anybody else. And I think I think because of the brain that you have when you're younger, and the fact that, like, you have less support when you're younger, makes it so much harder. And once I got a little bit older and I was in charge of myself, that was like one less thing to worry about, and it did become a little bit easier as an adult. Like, now I'm like, I know what it is. I've done the research. I've read the books. I've listened to podcasts. I do whatever I can to help me understand what this is and how to move forward. so when I do encounter a kiddo that I think, has depression and stuff, I have the tools to help them, or at least to let them know what it is, and then it becomes easier. I think it definitely becomes easier. um, I don't think anybody with depression will ever say high school was the best time of my life.
Mm. I have a question for you, Tom Pock, and it's personal, but we have in the audience, we have freedom writer teachers that say hello. We have freedom writers. We know that several of your students from the University of San Diego. So I don't know who wrote this specific question, but somebody wanted to know, how did you cope when your parents left? Or better yet, you left them?
Well, so two things. So one, the police came to my parents' door when I was 18 months old, and they were heroin addicts, and they did what heroin addicts do. They left over the rooftops. So I don't have any memory of New York. So I was abandoned and got adopted, brought to Orange County. So I grew up behind the orange curtain, and things were bad. And I always was nostalgic for the heroin addict parents. And so I felt like a two-time loser, So it was very complex because, they talk about the 5 stages of grief. Well, you're talking about grief about something that, and I didn't see a picture of my parents till I was 11. I didn't know if they were alive or dead. I assumed that nobody showed me a picture because nobody had pictures of them. And then I found out they're living like a few cities away, and I had a younger brother and sister. So, so the answer to that question is my whole life, because it's very complicated. And sometimes you'll go into these programs and they'll say, you'll go through 5 stages of grief. So like, hello, sorry, doesn't fit your thing, because my story is so complex, So that's part of the journey, And in fact, one of the reasons I have books is because, books don't leave you. They're just there. Somebody could steal them, and then I give extra participation to my students. But the thing is that, people have really complex circumstances. And one of the things I like about Tony and Meghan and you is that you don't assume that people have had wonderful childhoods, and that even that they've had parents, there's a lot of assumptions that people make. People ask me, well, what do your parents do? They're heroin addicts. So the administrator asked me that. Well, if you're asking me the question, I'm going to tell you the answer. So like Slumdog Millionaire, like if you don't want to hear the answer to the question, don't ask me the question, So then with the freedom riders, everybody's just cool with it, because people understand that people have complex things, and they don't make assumptions, and that's the really important thing. It's like Tony said, like, we don't have to talk about this stuff. We just understand, because we know that we understand each other, and you don't have to talk about it. And so sometimes, if you make the phone call, you just don't have to say anything. Like if Tony called me, I might answer, because I don't have to say anything. He doesn't have to say anything either. We'll just be silent on the phone.
What's funny is, Tom, you just did something that you do all the time, and I do too, is we drop these like crazy bombs and then we just move forward, right? Like you're like, oh, parents are heroin addicts, whatever, like, oh yeah, I was beaten up and left for dead, and then you just kind of move on.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I didn't realize I did until later on in therapy, and then now I see you do it too.
Yeah, the 5-minute story.
Yeah. I'm like,
well, you seem fine now.
But Tom, what you just shared, I think, was really beautiful about books don't leave you. And you are the most generous person when it comes to buying books. Oftentimes, Dear Freedom Writer or the Freedom Writer's Diary, you'll buy them for every student you have in a semester. And sometimes you'll buy like 100. It's like an Oprah moment where you get a car and you get a car, and it's you get a book and you get a book. And it is your love language. Not only you.
And I sent Lexi poetry, and I made sure it was okay with her parents, because one of the things that's messed up about our world is that people get suspicious if you're being nice. And that's one of the things I hate about the world the most, is that being nice shouldn't be something people are suspicious at. Sometimes people are just nice because they want to do good things, But I'm very careful with that. I talk to her parents, say, hey, I want I'm going to send Lexi this book of poetry because I wanted everybody to feel safe. I wanted everybody to be cool on the boundaries, But reading can be, that's when we go into the juvenile hall and we give the kids the books, and they're looking at books, and a lot of them have kids, Like the book can change your life, because you start reading, you start thinking, you can be writing.
I love it.
That's what, one of my great people, Otto's mottos, learned how to type, and now he's a superpower.
I love it. Megan, I have a question for you. Someone wrote in, as a teacher, what are some signs that someone is struggling with their mental health, and how do you help them without being invasive? So how would you answer that? Because you are currently teaching, you have many students who are in a non-traditional school.
Mhm.
What can we as educators or adults in families or in communities of care look for, but also not be invasive, or should we be invasive?
Yeah, I think it depends on the student in terms of, level of invasiveness. Some students want you to kind of push in and, kind of not invade their space, but they want you physically there, where some, they're going to push back. It's like a Chinese finger trap, where if you push too much, you're not going to get anything out of them. You want to look for things like any change, like I said before, any change in behavior. If you got a kid on the basketball team and suddenly they stop showing up to practice, or they don't care about it, they lose interest in it, that's a big sign. Changes in, their personal appearance. Do you have a kid who, a girl comes in wearing makeup every day and all of a sudden she's stopped, or she's wearing the makeup that she wore the day before, things like that. Changes in food, or is it they've stopped eating, or they're eating a lot more. They're coming and taking the snacks out of your room, and grabbing everything. There's a ton of snacks, or there's a ton of signs. But you really, you kind of got to know the kid, and I try to ask my students, in a calm moment, and usually when there's less in the room, if you get to a point where you're having a moment and you need a break, let me know, let my aide know. And then I always ask them, and what works best for you? Does it work? I can remember having a conversation with Lexi, she would have panic attacks. And I would say, what do you want me to do in that situation? And, I said, do you want me to put my hand on your shoulder or whatever, and she would say, no, don't touch me, because if you touch me here, then you have to touch me with equal pressure here, and it's got to be the same. But some kids want that physical touch, so I will ask, the kids if you're in that moment, or if we have a moment where they're stressed and they're spiraling, afterwards, I kind of debrief with them. All right, that happens again. What do you need from me? Do you want me to sit by you? Do you want to take a walk? Do you want me to let you put your head down? You have to really get to know their system, how they work things out, and it can be tricky, but it's something, it takes a lot of work, but to most benefit the kid, you've really got to kind of individualize it. And what works for them one day, because especially with my kids, they're adolescents, so everything is changing so quickly. What works one day might not work in 2 months, or medication gets managed. It's not a one and done conversation. It's continual, and it's something that you have to work on every single day. I can't just show up to work and kind of phone it in. You've really got to be on all day, every day. So those are some of the signs that you look for.
I want to end with a question for each of you, but from a place of your younger self, when you did not have the tools or the therapist or the language or even the knowledge of what was happening. And I want you guys to give that younger self grace. And what I mean by that is there a moment that you can identify when you were in a dark place? Maybe you weren't picking up your phone, or maybe you were in a hospital, or maybe you self-harmed. I want you to identify that time, and I want you to give yourself grace and speak to that younger self. So Tom Puck, I know there's been some really difficult moments through your journey, and I love that we can lovingly call you Tom Puck, but you're Dr. Reifer. You're an esteemed author and a professor. I would love for you to choose a moment, and how can you give that younger little Tom, some grace?
Well, one of my favorite books that I sign all the time is The Outsiders. And there's that moment where Dally says to Johnny, We're all proud of you, little buddy. And I said that to a friend of mine recently, a colleague who died at a very young age, and it was the last thing I said to him over email, And and I'm proud because Tony's my friend, and Megan's my friend, Miss G is my friend, and that took a lot of work to be alive, to have those great things happen.
Can I say back to you, my friend, to stay golden, to stay golden. Meghan, maybe in that time after birth and when your postpartum was at its hardest, how can you, as that wounded healer who would eventually have these two beautiful boys, how could you give yourself grace?
I think stepping back and talking to myself like I would to a friend. I can give my friends all the advice in the world, but I can't take it myself, and that, you don't have to be perfect. I had a student who had given me a sticker that still hangs on my wall. You don't have to be perfect to be amazing, and I think I would tell her that, you can read every parenting book and you can, be the only one to nurse and not give them bottles because you have to be the source of food. And you can do all the tummy time and the stimulations so that you're, developing those key, pieces. And it doesn't have to be so draining. It's okay for your kid, even, your young infant, to see that, hey, mom takes care of herself, and that, your kids watch you, you're a model for your kids, and you have to model what you want for them. So I think I would have benefited from that years ago.
Tony, before I ask you, I want to answer a question that somebody sent me. Joseph Campanella specifically asked me, Miss G, how do you handle your mental health? And for those on the screen, you will instantaneously recognize this, but I carry this around in my bag every day. It is a beautiful butterfly that was given to me by Lexi Rodriguez. It says, "Be the change." I know that you, Meghan, have a beautiful butterfly on your arm. And Joseph, what this is symbolic of is someone who gave it everything she could. She left it all on the page. And so I carry this with me every single day in my bag. And it's a reminder of how hard we have to work, how hard we have to love, how we have to be present and intentional. And with her spirit still with us, that's one of the ways that I find myself grounded, is always having this on my person, this beautiful butterfly and the quote that Lexi chose, "Be the change." So thank you for that question of me personally, Joseph. And I want to end with you, Tony, with grace, whether it's X's and O's or your mantra of being alive at midnight. What can you give to that younger Tony before I made you go to therapy, before you started being a wounded healer and talking to young people? What could you tell that younger self that would allow you to be alive at midnight?
What's funny is I wasn't supposed to go to that school. I wasn't supposed to be in your class. I wasn't supposed to meet you or any of my brothers and sisters or anybody else. I was supposed to go to Poly, which is the rival school. On my way there that morning, I actually got jumped, right? And so I went to the school, bleeding, bloody nose, black eye, and I told the counselor I can't come here. And she's like, "Okay, fine, then I guess we'll send you to Wilson." Right? And I thought, man, what a horrible day, right? What a horrible day. What a horrible experience. Now I have to go to this school that's on the other side of town. I don't know anybody there. I don't know anything about it, right? And then I walked into your class, and my life was changed forever. And I often, I used to think so much like, wow, what a crazy coincidence. What a crazy coincidence. Right. And I was telling my cousin this story. And then at the end of the story, I said, isn't that a crazy coincidence? And he's like, yes, but he's like, you're forgetting one thing. I was like, what? And he said, you tried. He goes, you actually tried. You could have dropped out. You could have went somewhere else. You could have just sat there and not did anything. He goes, but you tried. You believed in what you guys were doing and yourself and all of that and your brothers and sisters, and you tried. Um, that's the thing that I would tell my younger self with grace. Um, buddy, you got to try. You know, things are going to be really, really difficult. They're going to be way more difficult for you than they are for other people, and you're going to notice it, and it's going to fucking suck, man. You know, and it's going to suck because you're going to be carrying this weight your entire life, and it's not fair. It's not. But things don't get easier. You get stronger because of the weight, right? The weight gets lighter. Now, when you have a bad day, your bad day doesn't affect you nearly as much as it did when you were younger, you know, because we're so much stronger. And now we try. Now it's our go-to. Now it's, you know, now problems are not problems. They're just things that we need to figure out, you know? And that's what I would say is just keep pushing forward, keep pushing that rock up the hill, man. And one day you'll be strong enough to carry that freaking thing up that hill.
I'm going to ask my amazing team to keep up that quote on the screen because it is from Nancy Rodriguez. And those of you that are watching and are listening later, Nancy is the mother of Lexi. She was standing next to me when I received this beautiful butterfly. And I want to read to all of you that Nancy wrote, "Thank you all for being so open about your mental health struggles. Conversations like this break down stigma, make it easier to reach out for support, and help all of us show up for each other in a more real and meaningful way. Remember, I am here for you." And I want to say thank you to Nancy for being in our life, for being that sister, that mother, that friend to all of us. I want to thank these courageous superheroes in my midst who are talking about something that is uncomfortable and messy and icky. And yet you did so with such aplomb and with such dignity and such grace. And I hope those that are listening will share this. Those that are watching will sit somebody down and share this experience with them. And I hope all of you realize that maybe in a dark place, be it Dr. Reifer, Meghan Abruzzo, or Tony, they can be that light, that lighthouse. And so you can reach out to us and know that you're not alone. So I thank everyone for being in this safe space, for taking this journey with us tonight. And may you pay it forward to someone else in need. I am honored. I am humbled. And I love each and every one of you to infinity and beyond. Thank you for having this conversation tonight.
You are my family. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Love you guys.
Love you. Love you all. Love you all.
Love you, Megan. Love you, Tom.
Love you guys.
Love you, Tony.